Okay, this is a brief lesson for the Cornet Project class. First, I'll read from Bible Survey Outlines, Dr. John Owen. This is a very handy, very useful tool, and it lays out real nice and flat if you want to use it in class. And we do use it here in the Cornet Project class. In the book of Revelation, we have, it's titled A Guide to the Future, and we come down to point 3, the things which shall be hereafter, chapters 4 through 22, and the section A, or point A, under that in outline format is the 70th week of Daniel, chapters 4 through 19. And that's where the 70th week is placed. Now, what would be the rationale for futurism is an interval between the 69th and 70th weeks. So we look at this, just remember, between March 14th, 445 BC, and AD 32, April 6th, is 483 years at 360 days per year. It's exactly 173,880 days. Now, I said all that to say that this was the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and to the triumphant entry of Christ. So when we have, we're missing, so we take 490 minus that 483, and that equals that 7 years. That's considered Daniel's week, the 70th week of Daniel. So that's a rationale for the interval, because when Christ came, there was not 7 years following that. Now, he had completed 3.5 years, but this is a rationale for the futurism itself. Is there a 70th week into the future? And then in the conversation about pre-tribulation rapture, mid-tribulation rapture, and post-tribulation rapture, that might be, as I would recommend you look up a video by Dr. Gene Kim. He shows in 1 Corinthians a place where Paul speaks of being changed, which we know the doctrine of the resurrection, it's actually will be changed. And then everyone who died in Christ, our spirits have already gone on to be with the Lord. So the Lord has plenty of saints to bring back with him when he returns. So that's really wasn't a problem that needed to be solved by where to place the rapture. And then for people who are tethered to that, I will just say, let's look at the futurism, the future construct of futurism as it's often taught. And then if you need a rapture, that is an event of imminence, as I was always taught, because in 1980 I was supposed to leave, and I started asking questions. And by 1988, a famous author, Hal Lindsey, I think was involved in 88 Reasons Why in 88, so we didn't leave. And then the Y2K came and went, and then people like me, gullible, really always looking for Christ to remove me from the earth. And it had really nothing to do with eschatology in relationship to 70th week of Daniel. I'd never even studied, still haven't actually studied that. So in Daniel 9:25, the decree to rebuild, and then March 14th, 445 BC, until the triumphant entry of AD 32, April 6th, and that being 483 years times a 360-day year, given the 173,808 days. Now, I've done some numerics, but, and then of course here's our helpful solution here, where, as I tell people, as a Baptist, I don't have any obligation, nor do I know any Catholics or Protestants or Judaic or Islamics or New Agers or denominationalists who say I have to be. I think that's just an echo from something in an ancient past. I've never had anybody, except some feedback had come in on this outreach website and saying I had to fall into one camp or another. But that's probably because if you, like, for example, I remind people that if you can suggest for a moment that you can see from a point of view from where no contradiction appears, as demonstrated in support for the Christian assertion of the Trinity, the Bible doctrine of the Trinity, the uniqueness of the God of the Bible, well, everything else is in degree of difficulty much less. So this, you don't have to be a young or old earther either. So if you're interested in studying the Bible, you won't be, because taking the Bible to support one side or the other, first, young is referring to the amount of referential time, Genesis 1:14, and then old is referring to the amount of age and decay accrued, which that can only be through, some people have to dig in the ground, other people have to look into the sky, and we can just search the scriptures. So this formula demonstrates the veracity of 360 days. So that's helpful. Here, this is helpful to understand where's the rationale. And I remind you, my systematic theology teacher, he was an engineer, hard science educated, well-trained professional long before he became the teacher of systematic theology. So his rationale would be there's a 70th week pending. Now again, this is just the use of third grade arithmetic. So now let's look to this 7-year period, this 1260 days, and that's just a small line. So let's just talk about the 7 years, and a covenant is established as it's constructed in the future. We look to the future, how that would be. I and a friend were in jest having a little bit of fun talking about Donald Trump, the new president of the United States, or the last one we've had, latest. And we talked a few years ago about would he be the last Trump because of what happened in 1980 with the Temple Mount coming under the jurisdiction of Jerusalem at that time after the 1967, after 1967, and then by 1980 all that came under the jurisdiction, and then you take 80 and you have 40 years, so a generation similar to 1948 to 1988, 40 years is how Lindsay was proffering. Well, now we're in 2020 and the election's coming up, and his son-in-law is a Judaizer, an advocate for Middle East. The embassy's been moved. American embassy's located there. Jerusalem's been recognized as the capital of Israel. All these things are happening, and his name is Trump. So we're now laughing now because now we have this global pandemic, COVID-19, and all these horrible things. But President Trump actually did say, it is funny, but he actually did say that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, he would make a deal over there. So if that deal happens, some have said it'd be on Passover. Well, this first 3.5 years, I'm not really sure, not being tethered to the tribulation as people have made it. If you're talking about a 7-year period of enduring tribulation, that's really not the case. These first 3.5 years, I'll just write it here, this first 3.5 years, now these are 360-day years. You can do the math, 42 months times 30 days, 1260 days. That's also in the book of Revelation. And Jesus said in Matthew 24, after the tribulation. So here, if this is where the covenant's broken, as we have constructed Futurism, and we have a 7 years, we have a 70th week here that's unaccounted for. So if that is a rationale for the future, now let's move to where a lot of the banter is. And we already have Jesus saying he would go and prepare a place and come for us. We know in the Bible that angels accompany us. The Lazarus, those who were here to requite his, Lazarus was in the bosom of Abraham, but there was a lesson about the man who tore down his barns, and he said told his soul to take ease and be of comfort, and it said, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be requited. So there are those who would came to requite his soul. So we're escorted out of this life as children of God, and so we're already there, we're gone, but Jesus said he would come and get us. When we die, our spirits separate. Paul, as the rationale is now for that text in the resurrection chapter, is that Paul was talking about something that wasn't associated with tribulation. So we might not need to commingle what we're talking about here in the futurism, in that construct. And that would probably be better to know that we're talking about what we're talking about in the future in relationship to a signing of a covenant, which, according to a really good scholar, if you ever want to really understand this and see someone that laid it out, untangled end time events, Dr. Glenn Davenport. Now, it doesn't mean don't study for yourself. It means go through, but he lines all this out and works it out. Now, I'm just simply using language and then a little bit of arithmetic, since we're always talking about numbers. But this word here, meta, that Jesus used after it, you can look this up, blueletterbible.org. There's a little app there, blueletterbible.org. It says a primary preposition often used adverbially, properly denoting accompaniment or like in midst of or amid, local or causal. So that's also a rationale for people who say mid-tribulation. The thing is, it's strange, is that's the way, that's up to how you translate this. So afterward or amid. It's just that when you say that, it doesn't mean it's in the middle of the 7 years, because no tribulation is ongoing the first 3.5. So if we translate it mid, you're really a mid-tribber. Let's just say you were. In this class, we are all grown-ups, and we study. We have professional training. We're all disciplined, and we come in here to learn and to talk freely, collaborative reasoning. So really, if you were a mid-tribber, then if we're talking about in relationship to the 7-year period, so we're looking at, here's half, so here's 1, 2, 3. So you're like you're really a 0.75. Yeah, I'm not really in the middle, but I'm all the way at 75% into the week. So that would be not what you meant, because people that tout mid-trib aren't the people who think about it necessarily. For example, I like to remind this, all of you all, especially not being able to be in the class for a while, remember there's always a lot more fans in the stands than there are players on the field. So there's a lot more people that will just say mid-trib, or pre-trib, or post-trib, whatever. But it doesn't mean they've ever thought about it. And this is a very unusual class, because it was, people would almost, went out of their way. And you'll almost think that they know what they're talking about, and you'll want to find out what they're talking about, and then you'll learn that they really don't have anything to say. They were just wanting to get whatever they garnish from that. So now that we're here, if you're a mid-tribber, now if you're pre over here, you're not talking about what Matthew 24 is talking about. You're doing what the intellectually honest Dr. Gene Kim said, that would be something else, such as in the church letter to the church in Corinth that Paul was referring to, that wasn't associated with this part of history. And what Jesus is talking about, I go to prepare a place for you, I'll come back and get you. It's probably why the imminence has always been ridiculed, because when you commingle the expectation of children of God to be taken to our heavenly home, so to speak, and received, and then of course we know saints will be with him when he returns. So all of my loved ones that went before me, believers who died in Christ, are already with him, so they'll return with him. But let's keep that event just for this conversation. So just put a push pin there, and then we'll discuss and have a lesson on 1 Corinthians 15, the account in John's Gospel that Jesus spoke of, and then we'll look at that text where the man who was boasting in relationship to his soul, what his error was, he was relating his possessions with the condition of his soul, and that was the foolishness of it, because at the very moment he began to rest in that presumption, his soul was requited of him. And we'll look at who did the requiting and how did that happen. So now that we're back on page here, so the best you could be is a mid-tribber. Now we're over here, because there's no tribulation over here. So no one really means 7-year tribulation when they say that. It's just we say it loosely, I suppose. So now as this is escalating, now that this broken, let's say, the breaking of this signed treaty here, let's say it happens here at 3.5 years. So now you're over here. Now as this escalates, you're really starting to narrow this. But now there's one more thing, and Jesus said in Matthew 24:22, lest those days be shortened, and that's kalabalo. And you come over here, and that prevents all flesh from destruction and the elect from destruction. We know in 70 AD there would have been nothing to inhibit the marauders from continuing to kill and destroy. That's why Jesus warned us, his followers, not to even bother going into our homes, but get off the rooftop and go. Well, that also, Habakkuk shared that same concern when the Chaldeans came in, and God used them to judge the southern tribe of Judah, the abusive brethren in the southern tribe, and brought in the Chaldeans, because Habakkuk, rightfully so, was expressing concern that in his questions he was vindicating God, and he was asking questions about these marauders who would come in, because he said they won't stop. Like a fisherman with a net and a hook, he'll just continue to take as many fish are available. So Jesus cuts this off. So now we have this working. So here we go. So here's this kolabolo. So we have 1,260 days, 3.5 years, 360-day years at 42 months times 30 days, 1,260. So we got all that. So now so you see where we're really talking now is where do these two things meet? Where does this in midst of, after? And you say, well, after. Well, out here, you can't mean, I don't mean, I didn't say other people don't, but we can't mean after the entirety of the 1,260 days, because the cutoff comes. So somewhere in here, that's really interesting if you think about it. Because we're looking at now, we only have 25% of the entire 7 years remaining, and we're looking at something happening in here, that is here, somewhere in here. So if you ever talk to someone, you're really looking at a margin of error of plus or minus 12.5%. Which that's interesting, and it's like Dr. John Owen told us in class once. He said it's really strange how much people argue about such a very small amount of time, and that would help explain what this is about. It would help explain, is there a rationale for a 70th week? Well, you can use the arithmetic, and then as people say there's no such thing as a 360-day year, you can demonstrate the relationship of it in resolving the non-existent young versus old. It doesn't exist any more than polytheism versus monotheism for a Christian. We support the Bible as the book that has no contradictions, and we are glad to see from the point of view, that point of view which is scripted us, which contains no contradiction. So hope this helps. This is just remember this ratio that some people, it really was used to demonstrate the decay rate and what God does. And then this, using the language, you have in Revelation this number. But we don't need to leave the cutoff out. So somewhere in here, when all this is escalating, and as Jesus said, Great Tribulation, the book of Revelation says in Revelation 7:14, the tribulation, the great. I mean, somewhere in all this, you have a cutoff coming this way, which prevents all flesh from being destroyed and prevents the elect, which are the target of the adversary, as Jesus was the target, the elect one, when Herod had the children killed. So all those innocent children were killed because he was after one elect. Moses, same in the Old Testament, the Pharaoh was killing all of these innocent children because he was targeting the one elect. All people are subject to the slaughter because they're after the elect. And Jesus said that'll be cut off, and that will preserve all flesh from being destroyed. So that's a gracious God to collaterally extend his grace to intervene on the behalf of the lives of these people who aren't the elect, because of the elect being pursued by maniacal, blood-lusting marauders. So that's it. That's all we got. That's all we need. So if you ask your friend, you just say, I'm a 12.5% return of Christ, 12.5% tribulation. Somewhere in this last 25% of a 7-year period, somewhere in this where the Kala Balo is factored in, because there's no reason to factor that out, and there's no reason to shorten the days because we have 1260, but the shortening means that if there's an intervention, that would be the return. So you have a blessed day, enjoy the lesson, and maybe we'll soon get back together in our classes and hammer it out a little more. So have a blessed day.